Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 616th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, the Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Phong H. Frank Maresca, Tamara Gonzales, Sam Messer, E.J. Hauser, Vera Lutter, Brian Belott, and Lyle Rexer. We're also thrilled to welcome Carla Harryman here today to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place and of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land we are speaking from. The Brooklyn Rail would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, as well as for their support of our growing archive. You can view today's event in our full archive on the YouTube channel. And now to introduce today's guest and hosts. Phong H. is publisher and artistic director of the Brooklyn Rail, the River Rail, Rail Editions, and Rail Curatorial Projects. Frank Maresca is co-founder of Rico Maresca Gallery in New York City. Tamara Gonzales is an artist who works with a variety of painted pattern motifs in figuration and abstraction. She has a studio in Brooklyn and in upstate New York, where she develops her own visual language, resulting in a wonderful mixture of exuberant color, energetic line, and archetypal imagery. Artist, curator, performer, and publisher Brian Belott is based in Brooklyn. His work playfully situates dissimilar objects, ideas, and found oddities against one another and alongside one another in order to see what they might create. E.J. Hauser is a painter based in Brooklyn, who is represented by Derek Eller and Philip Haverkampf and Lichtenschneider Gallery. Her paintings are graphic but open to interpretation, teetering between iconography and something familiar but abstract. Vera Lutter has gained international recognition for her uniquely produced camera obscura images of industrial and architectural sites around the world, with New York City as a recurring subject in her practice. She also makes video work that focuses on how light and sound articulate time's passing. And independent curator and writer Lyle Rexer is the author of multiple books and has published hundreds of catalog essays on art, architecture, and photography, contributed to such publications such as the New York Times, Harper's, Art in America, among many others. He teaches in the graduate and undergraduate programs at SVA. And we are so very grateful to be joined by these fabulous, fabulous guests today on the occasion of the Singing in Unison series. And I'm very excited to pass the mic over to you, Lyle, to get us started. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. A couple of remarks before we get going. I want to thank all the artists involved. It's a great group, and I think it mirrors in a really interesting way, I think, Phong's idea about sort of the intentions of the show. So it's great to have everybody here. Many of you I haven't met before, so it's really a privilege. And the second thing is that I'd like to thank all the Rail staff. And I've done a number of these new social environment programs, and every time we do them, I'm always really impressed at the work that goes into them and really the level of attention that the Rail pays to what we're trying to do. So I thank you guys again. I think it's great to be here, and of course thank Phong for being on. I just want to make a couple of remarks, and I think Phong's going to take over for a while and kind of walk us through the show or the group of shows that constitutes at this point Singing in Unison. And I'm intrigued by this, and I was very intrigued by Phong's ambitions for this program early on. One of the things I've been writing about for the last 25, almost 30 years now is kind of the the issue of the outsiders coming in, and that's been a really important topic, and certainly in modern art since the beginning of the last century. And it seems to me that this program of Fong's, this ambitious set of exhibitions, is really kind of the most important or one of the most ambitious iterations of what has been a long, long process of a kind of mutual recognition, you might say, of the various forms of art making, and how that kind of, and how what they might have to do with each other. In the past, it's often been the case that outsiders, that is, people who are not trained, may have been institutionalized. Their work has been used as a stick to beat bourgeois artists. I think we're way beyond that. And one of the things that intrigues me about these exhibitions is the fact that there is a new kind of big tent with some really interesting intentions and I think juxtapositions. So having said that, I'd like to just ask Phong if he would walk us through, talk about your original intentions for the show, how it came together, or a series of shows, I should say, and how it came together, and maybe just walk us through the different venues, because we do have slides from, so far, I think 4 or 5 venues that have been, or that have participated so far. I wonder, Phong, if you would orient us.
Sure, it will be a pleasure, Lyle. It might be a little long. It's hard to squeeze everything in at this point because it's very hard to really weave this clear narrative from the beginning to end. But I think it might begin looking back now, having grown up in Hue, the Tet Offensive during the war in Vietnam. I was taught from an early age by my beloved paternal grandmother, who was a serious practitioner of Buddhism, of the essential teaching of the Lotus Sutra, as you might remember, which emphasizes on the beauty and the purity of the lotus flower that cannot be separated from the vile and the filthy of the mud from which it's born out of. So it's a teaching of the unity of all things and all being. There's no separation between the world of human beings and the world of nature, including animal, vegetable, and so-called deep ecology. Things and beings that are unmanifested, beyond existent or non-existent, yet remain unbounded by time and space. That's the whole idea. In other words, the very idea of any pair of opposites that exists in life is to be fully embraced. You know, for example, if there is no suffering, there's no happiness. If there's no above, there's no below. If there is no left, there is no right. So in a way, you know, during the Trump administration, whatever things that we were taking for granted since the end of the Cold War, I would argue, that associated with the collapse of the Soviet Union and communism, meaning there was 2 things I would say that we were being mindful of, unmindful of, we've forgotten. One is that there had been consistent struggle, I would say, of the middle, of the 2 main parties in America, the Party of Liberty, which represent the tyranny of the minority, and the Party of Equality stand for the tyranny of the mass. And I think during the course of this last 2.5 years, I made great effort to go back and read everything I could of American history. So in the 2 week digesting through Alexis de Tocqueville, who describes so clearly, so eloquently, in the midst of Jacksonian populism in 1830s, right? His 2-volume Democracy in America. The first book was published in 1835, second in 1840. That liberal democracy, properly understood, means to imply that extreme equality and extreme liberty are likely to somehow coincide at some point in time. So think of that for a moment. I don't know, I can remember exactly what he said, but he say, I'm paraphrasing, I think, one can imagine an extreme point at which freedom and equality touch each other and intermingle, then with one different from those like him, no one will be able to exercise tyrannical power. Men will be perfectly free because they will be entirely equal, and they will be perfectly equal because they will be entirely free. So as we see the left, the explosion of individuality, that seemed to undermine tradition or past culture, while the right, the delinking of the individual as likely result of economic conditions that are susceptible to global economy. At this point, we know that, you know, but at some point in time, it's now, that is what's going on now. And he predicted way back. And two, the way I felt deeply is that leading to the Second World War with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to the end of the Cold War in 1991, at least the left and the right up to that point share a common enemy, namely Soviet Union and communism. Why at home, I would say that politicians are no longer making effort to win their voters, you know, their constituent by campaigning, going out in person from middle class in the suburb to working class in the rural area, partly because re-election has been paid for by business people. And abroad, however, which meant that if every country like Russia, like China, and elsewhere in South America, Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, you name it, if they get assimilated into this huge melting pot, we will never have an enemy again. That was the whole idea, because everybody is just like us, like America. Well, this has proven to be profoundly a disaster, as you guys know, we all know. For every country has their own history, their own culture, their own art, literature, poetry, music, fable, folklore, you name it, custom, food, and so on and so forth. This is exactly what we've been experiencing with Russia, China, and the other country now in revolt against liberal hegemony. So in any case, whenever I get, you know, whenever time that we feel like both parties get complacent and being out of touch with people, and there's an absence of the middle ground that constitute for the idea of town hall, the idea of public sphere, a platform that Tocqueville called the art of association, the art of joining, you know, that encourage people, including public intellectuals, who can really mediate in the middle on behalf of the people on both sides, the voice of people, so to speak. If that's an absence of that middle, we are in great peril. So I don't know how to describe, except that on Monday, March 16, 2020, when former President Trump came on television and announced the 15-day quarantine, I'm sure you all remember, and he also deployed the term that we kind of was very confused, but a little bit angry too, social distancing, you remember? Social distancing to the rail was a manipulated term. We felt that was a way to even keeping us even apart with greater degree than we have in the past, especially in the sector of the arts and humanities, which I would say had been subjected for specializations in the mid-70s. You know, it's so long. When the war in Vietnam ended in 75, all the progressive lab, all the great radical lab intellectual activists gained profound disillusionment. Therefore, they went to the academy to find refuge and stay there forever. In the next several decades, the academy became the machine. Another industry like sport industry, food industry, military industrial complex, and so on and so forth. So anyway, we had that meeting at night, that Monday, 16, 2020. And I asked my team, you know, with great urgency, how can we deploy, utilize technology, including Zoom, Instagram, any form of social media that can be useful to amplify the slowness of culture, as opposed to the way it's been used as speed, that any demagogue's favorite tool to spread propaganda. You all remember, Hitler used the advent of radio to spread his message. It's more effectively than asking any reader to read a thoughtful article published in local newspaper. So we can name endless examples of this kind. So, we realized we had to be just aggressive, Lyle. We had to be aggressive. So therefore, the next morning, literally the next morning, Tuesday, March 17, 2020, we launched our new social environment lunchtime conversation. So as you know, it's a way to amplify that togetherness, the unity, for the middle ground, for the art and the humanities. So in talking to friends, and I realized that when we refer to music history, American music history, the amazing contribution African-American had made, among many things, jazz and Delta blues and, all the form of music as you remember. And when every time you heard Bob Dylan being interviewed, being asked who was the most profound, important influences, early formation as a musician, he had no problem saying on hand, Hank Williams, and the other hand would be Blind Boy Fuller or Josh White or the Delta Blues Master. And same thing, you can ask Mick Jagger or maybe Keith Richards, Rolling Stone, same thing. They would have no problem saying it would be Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Eric Burton of The Animal would say the same thing. And so it's very infuriating when asking artists, whether JJ here, whether Brian Belott, Chris Martin, Joe Bradley, you name it, Kathy Pratt, among our friends, of course, I'm happy that Tamara is here along with Frank and Vera, is that we don't think like that, artists. We don't think, having looked at any work of art and decide whether this is self-taught or taught, whether this vernacular or high culture being made through a work of art, not at all. So that's why the idea of singing in unison came so fast. I'm sorry, I have to lay out the context here, you guys, because when I'm being inspired, I can float and be very light. In other words, somehow gone back and read one night Hollis Collin, 2 essays published in The Nation 1915. It's called Democracy versus Melting Pot. It's so beautiful. The idea of singing in unison, it's very similar to being inspired by that great argument that he had written at the time. In other words, say, it's a disaster to put people together in a melting pot, expecting to take away from their history, from their ancestral history. Whereas democracy is to be conceived, if it's alive and thriving, is the respect for each individual. Just like in the symphony, each instrument had its own unique sound. You don't want the trombone to sound like the violin sound like the piano. So that is being amplified, encouraged, retain its own unique, what Kant call the natural end. Then the sound of the symphony will be brilliant, will be more unified, will be ecstatic in the symphonic whole. So that's why it all happened so fast. But it came out from the great warmth of our immanent Zoom, which is, we are here today. It's imminently just like the symphony, the grid divided in all, and everyone have an equal contribution. So it began with Lauren Bond, great neon here. Artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. I never seen anything like it. Seeing it in 2016, just soon after Trump election, and I realized this speaks for our time. I don't remember the last time when artists are being celebrated or the visual culture has been hugely appreciated in the last 2 decades. So this speaks so presently to our time, the responsibility of the artist, the creator. And I met artists of all individuals who have creative talents and impulses, you know, musician, poet, writer, and whatnot, all together. And I think this speaks for our time, like the way Robert Indiana loved sculpture that spoke for the 60s. So immediately we adopted it. We asked for permission to use it as the slogan of our Rail Curatorial Project. So it will be attached to what we do forever. So Singing in Unison was born out of this idea. It's very fast. So actually it started talking, I think it began with talking to Frank here, because Frank and I involved with the Fountain House, which is an admirable organization that helps artists with mental struggle, illness, so to speak, to gain their space and confidence and encouragement to do their work, you know? So it started out with my admiration for a lot of vernacular artists, so-called self-taught, but I don't want to put a label on these people. And that's exactly what the show came about. So literally talking to Frank and then talking to Sean Scully, the second part of our series, and talking to Cody Ryman and his brother Ethan Ryman and their managing director Marina at Art Cake, Marina Gluckman at Art Cake. We began working on the show immediately. The idea is that we all were so inspired by Hannah Arendt's notion of thinking or the banister, or the idea of when Toni Morrison say, if you surrender to the wind, you can ride it. So the idea of being fearless, being not that old thinking that we need some kind of platform clarity of structure from which we mobilize our show. So it very fast came quickly. So what you're gonna see here, every show beginning with Lauren Bond's Neon. And can I see the next slides, Eleanor? And the idea also, every single venue is dedicated to our friends who passed away the last couple of years. And literally, while we were put together, Art Cake, Wolf Tone, this collective from Hudson, which you will see the work in a minute. Literally 2 days before, our dear friend, Peter Limbo Wilson, who we all think the equivalent of Walt Whitman today, also wrote under the pen name Hakim Bey, the author of the cult classic TAS, Temporary Autonomous Zone, 1993, that means translated into 42 languages. Dear friend of ours, his philosophy helped me and the Rail Curatorial Project and the Rail as a living organism activate the way it does, without mission statement, without any kind of formal structure that impinging on our inner freedom. I don't have time to go into it now, but that's the basis of the show. You see the neon and you see each portrait that I made of our friend, dedicated to them. Next. And here it is. You enter, after you see the neon, you will see Joe Jackson sculpture there with the horn. So Wolf Tone is the name of their collective, which is the sound that bring up this, I would say, dissonant. It's like the bottom of the bowl of the bass when you play on it. So it's really like the sound of the howling of the wolf. And here is a little beautiful storefront recreated by a collective, which in Wolf Tone called Incident Report. Next. And you come in, and here what you see, 20 plus something artists. The Wolf Tone is really 4 main proponent artists: Nancy Saver, Stella Smith, Maximilian Goldthorpe, and Pradeep Dalal. Otherwise, it's 20 plus artists participating. And the idea is very simple. They were brilliantly, envision that each object, whether it's made or found object, can be put together in this fashion. So it's colliding to this stream of movement. On the right, you can see here texture, material, color, and whatnot. Next, here is the close-up of it from a distance. So you see there's a lot of implication of different a topic through the object making that you can see that it's all associated with our concern in the day, you know, the economy, ecology, you know, climate change and everything, political, social issue too. Next. And on the cross, here's another beautiful close-up of the work you see here. It's not melting pot, by the way. It's associated in close proximity or amplified sense of social intimacy, but it's not melting pot. Next, in contrast, you see this amazing band of painted with ecline blue across it, give a sense of, you know, air to breathe through this amazing intonation, which I think is going to travel to Canada and elsewhere, perhaps went back to some fancy gallery in New York. It's hard to tell. And in the back, next, you will see the whole, this is a little bit of a view, but it's really much bigger space, mobilized and installed by our friend, the great critic, David Levi Strauss. In fact, he's the Rail consulting editor. And you remember he ran the 14 years at the graduate program at SVA in art and criticism, art writing criticism. So here, encourage the idea of mobile library for direct democracy. So you come see the show, you can sit down and read all the favorite books, Levi's favorite books, and many of which are written by Dave, you know, not just David himself, but also, of course, were written by our friend, Peter Limbo Wilson. And I don't know what's next, but I believe, yes, it's Scully Tomasco Foundation, Sean Scully, and his wife partner, the painter Lillian Tomasco. It has been Sean's previous law studio in Chelsea. And we were talking and both will be inspired to create their own foundation because they have been staging at least 2 or 3 shows every year in the last 12 years of their friends, artists who don't have gallery representations. And the Rail, of course, took it seriously. We reviewed many of them. So we became fast friends. Both of them want to get back to the community. Within 2 days of talking about the show, they created the foundation immediately. And since we are committed, each show dedicated to a friend of ours who passed away. So talking to Julian Schnabel, he had just painted this painting of Lauren Wiener, who came and sat for Julian a few days before he passed away a few weeks later. So of course, this will be the right side to dedicate it to Lauren. Next, here's several views. You can see the beautiful skylight and the intricate wood structure above. Otherwise, it's quite large. I encourage you to come and see it. There's multitude of photography, painting of various medium, sculpture, abstract and representational work, singing together in unison, as you can see. Next, please. Yeah, a glimpse of view here of many different artists together. I think the one maybe even next better if we can go in. Here is a good example right here. I'm just going to briefly discuss like how the idea of parent or parallel came about, whether it's visual or visceral idea through the material relating to the image. So here it's very, you know, easy to group these, naturally to group this group of work together with Lauren Monk, this massive archive of his painting of places where artists have populated or gallery community. In this instance, is in Soho. So immediately it brings to the idea of urban environment, which obviously you can't really not do it without including Vera's work in it. The industrial site, you can see below, and that haunted image of her work. Right above is the great William Hawkins, a building somewhere. Frank can tell us whether it's a bank or a building in Columbus, Ohio. In the right, the far right is Andrew Moeller painting of you know, of the facade of a building in Midwest, which had been the subject of his scene. The middle is David Reed, can be read as the step, I guess, of a building. Similarly, below, David wrote black and white severe abstraction, even though it's in rectilinear and diagonal movement, it generates that similar urban environment or imagery. Next. And you see here, Sam Messer singing away with radiance of his typewriter, which I'm sure he can talk a little bit later. But I thought Ramirez right on top and just give an adjacent, relationship to the architectural site. But again, it's just the organic form of Sam image of the typewriter and Louis osmosis, strangely alien-like form on the left, standing gingerly on the pole and a coffee can. It is so brilliantly singing different tune in dissonance, Okay, next, I'm gonna move fast. Thank you. I never curate a show where I put my works in it, ever. I've done now 66 something or maybe nearly 70 show since 2000. But in this instant, my arm was twisted. Sean Scully say, Phong, your portrait must be included because it is singing in unison. It's the grid that came from the Zoom format that you and your Rail colleague have created. So the idea, democratic vistas that generated from Uncle Walt Whitman, we call him Uncle Walt, was imminently needed to be in the show. So my arm was just, I surrendered to the wind. So that's it. So this is Democratic Vista #1. I don't know how many portraits in here, but I urge you to go see it. Next. And a good instant here. And Brian Belott, one of our participant panelists here, can talk further also. But he's been obsessed with children's drawing before he was born. So here's a little 5 painting that you see, 6 actually. His copy of children's drawing, and I'm sure he has a lot to say about Rhoda Kellogg archive in a minute. But you see here and there, there are glimpses of mimicry in terms of imagery on the far right, particularly a anonymous artist, and Federico Somi below with the 2-arm stretch muscle or not, while Julian portrait of our friend Lauren Wiener is right next to Robert Bergman portrait of mostly, I would say, anonymous homeless people, but I wouldn't call that entirely. Haunting, very deeply felt, and certainly dignified. I don't know what else in this mix. Can we go next? Here's another glimpse. Go ahead, Eleanor. So below Grant, it's a unique artist ran, I think, gallery that I've seen in years, It's very unique. They rent the space, storefront from a Chinese kitchen supply store. And again, it always begin with Lauren Bonneon and dedicate here to recently passing of our dear friend, the great curator and writer, Constance Le Wallen. We call her Connie. Next, you can see here the front, the storefront with the neon again, and all the Todd and Sal Todd singing in unison, different medium. Sam is there, Kathy Bradford on the floor, Aaron Kelly on the left. And then there are things that were made by anonymous. Next, anonymous artists. And you had to go through the storefront in order to get to the backspace, which is here, a glimpse of many different artists. Ethan Ryman, below Eric Lingman, and then Mae Webster. And then below is Peter Saul, right next to John Searle, and then Ethan Ryman on the right. Next, similar here. We somehow got 2 John Searle on this site, very excited. Right below is Tom McLean. I thought the horizontal form corresponded well with the vertical rectilinear form of the radiator, pop up from the floor. And many terrific artists also. On the left, the radiator is Cy Morgan. And then one more, maybe, before we go to the next. Terrific, similar view of the opposite wall, Jassy Alapur, Bill Jensen. And then there's, you know, a wonderful horse racing painting that I picked up in Maine several years ago for $10. A painting I love so much, sitting right above Peter Acheson. I just love that idea that it sits on Peter Acheson. Next image, I think might be the last. Here is Sean Scully early works in the early 80s, I think. Right on the left is the painted checkerboard. And similarly with Matvey Levenstein, beautiful sublime landscape, as opposed to, you know, Fred Tomaselli in the right. And of course, Lucy Fratkin below, Lauren Monk, excuse me, and more. I think this may be ending of the third part. And then we go to Frank Maresca. This is the show that we dedicate to Atal Anand, our great friend, poet, playwright, painter, and perhaps one of the most unique creative human beings who came to the orbit of the real living organism. And we were lucky to have our dear friend, the great poet Charles Bernstein, to interview Atal before she passed away. Another moving episode in the course of doing the show also. Next, as you can see here, far away is Bill Jensen, triptych, blue cupola. Right in front is Arthur Siem sculpture. On the left and right, many Guy Goodwin, Lauren Monk again. It's hard to see, but the far right of the left is another great William Hawkins. And moving forward is Lauren Bond, of course, Neon. And next to her left is Moritz Luchak. That's okay, we can move fast. Far away is Vera Monumental photograph that hold that space so beautifully. And on her right, if you can go next, or we can see somehow, if you can stretch your eyes a little bit, go back a little bit there. You can see on the right is, again, Andrew Moeller, architecture facade, and Domingo Guccione, three beautiful visionary drawing of futuristic or visionary architecture form. It just reflects that kind of singing in unison with this dissonant sound. Next, here's another glimpse view of Tamara, wonderful painting, and Brian's two amazing copy of children's drawing on glass, I believe. And I was lucky to have my own in the middle. Again, I'm inject myself into the discourse. I never done that before, but with great pleasure, and no artists have tortured me yet. Okay, the next view, another instant, which is terrific. Lucy Fratkin again. And on the middle there is another great William Hopkins. On the right is EJ, wonderful painting, which I'm sure EJ can talk in a minute. Next, I believe that's maybe it. Oh my God, this, how can I not talk about this group right here with Chris Martin painted bread painting. Middle is Ramirez, amazing drawing, and then John Newman and whatnot. All right, maybe we end from Frank's space and we can go, oh, wow, it's hard to not mention David Reed and Peter Acheson again, and John Kessler in the middle. Terrific. Now we come to Tota, which is Lower East Side and dedicated to our friend Dan Grant, who passed away only a month and a half ago. And it was terrific to have this to be part 5. I'm sure Kyle can correct me if I'm wrong. So we can see the next first image. Yeah, here is Guy Goodwin, and you enter right after Lauren Bond. Neon 4 in the back there is Bob Witt sculpture. Next view. And here is Mark de Souvero painting of light. He have taken painting as a serious practice. So it's nice to have Mark's painting on the right, facing off Cecily Brown, wonderful pastel painting, I would say. And so you can also see in the far, in the background there, neon is lit by the luminous sculpture, you know, of Linda Bangley's right above. Next. Similarly here, if you see Tony Bishara painting the chromatic, symphonic, radiant, tiny little unit square made up of that painting, sitting right above Ugo Romagnone window, similar to Dorothea Rockburn on top of Mara de Luca, but most excitingly is this anonymous painting of 4 nudes that in somehow, you know, correspond to Vera's wonderful photograph of Apollo and Adriana, you know, a mythological painting. And Lauren Monk's another great painting in the middle, hold the same with David Reed on the right, and also John Kessler in the front. Sculpture, we don't really see it that clearly, but I urge you again, come and see it yourself. And next, another view on the right, so you can see Eddie Onnin's 3 fantastic drawing, which I can't wait to buy them all. So I gotta urge you to go see the show. I hate to really further explain because I'm dying to see our friend who can, you know, contribute more to the dialogue here. So this might be the end. Am I right, Eleanor? Oh, not yet. Okay, so I have to squeeze in a few more sentences here, which is, you know, with great pleasure. It just Matt Levenstein, luminous transparency with Sumi ink. It's exquisitely in, I don't know, in contrast with Richard Serra density of his usual drawing. As you can see, and on the right is mediated by the on-brush master, William Hawkins, again, of the forest. And that will be the end of my brief presentation, which is about, Jesus, 20 minutes already. All right, thank you so much. Back to you, Lyle.
Thanks a lot, Phong. Really heaped our plate here. You know, as I was going through this, just watching you go through this slideshow, I'm thinking, first of all, it's actually great to be able to spend a little bit more time, even away from the venues, to take advantage of how rich these shows really are. And by rich, I mean, they're really rich in alternatives. They're rich in, obviously, in sensations and voices, but as someone who's interested in the way artists work, possibilities that are available to them, I'm just struck again at just how many ways are, in a sense, available to make work, to, you know, to think about the world that you live in. We have, as we announced at the beginning, we have a group of the artists who are in the shows. I've got tons of questions for all of them, and I'm just trying to organize this so that, you know, so that we don't sort of get too hung up. But one thing I noticed, all the artists in many ways, that let's not say outside the norm, but they seem to me to be artists who are working in ways that have their own very, very distinct sources and intentions. And I wonder, I'm very interested in whether these artists had faced a certain amount of resistance in terms of the work that they were doing. For example, I would direct this maybe at Vera. Vera's operating in a photographic world that has certain, let's call it aesthetic norms. And she broke a lot of rules by not using a camera, by going back to an early photo process. I'm interested in Vera and how you saw yourself. Did you see yourself as a sort of outsider? Or did you see yourself fitting in?
Sorry, had to unmute. Thank you for that question. It's a really great question. And yes, I very much felt like an outsider when I started experimenting with photography, which I did before I had any photographic training, which looking back, I feel protected me from running into certain traps of knowledge. I was just incredibly excited by this idea of the experimentation of and with the camera obscura and sort of recording environments, which I inhabited myself originally.
Mhm.
And then subsequently got so fascinated by the image. But I was a complete outsider to the photographic world. And as I said, while feeling like an outsider, I also experienced that as freedom.
Ready, Sophia's.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just got distracted by Frank's background. So yeah, I wanted to direct the same question to EJ. EJ, I had a chance to see some of your work in the past, not as much as I should. And I'm really interested in your sources. I looked at the interview you did for the Rail, which was really fascinating, especially the video. I'm interested in whether how you saw your own practice with sources. Again, very much things that you have, let's say, divined in the world. And I wonder if you talk a little bit about those sources and about where you see your own practice fitting in, and your own ideas about what art is for. Because I think some of your ideas about kind of what you're up to are really, really valuable.
I'm so sorry, Lyle. I heard about half of your question.
I'm sorry. Is my mic not very good? Is that better?
When you're closer, it's much better.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. No, I was just interested in your where your ideas come from, the sources of your work, because they don't lie in the conventional art world, let's say. You're not responding to other people's work in the normal way, it seems to me. And I wondered if you talk about that, because it does make you sort of an outsider as well.
Sure. I wanted to add to something that Vera said. I liked what she said about kind of not having a conventional journey towards photography, protecting things about her process and things about her ideas. And I feel like because I didn't train as a painter, I have a kind of similar journey in painting. I mean, you know, I as a kid thought that I could just dip into painting to figure out things about color. And, just like a kid, not understanding how complex color and painting and image making and the trajectory of art history or the trajectory specifically of painting is. So I feel like it kind of protected me and it let me make a lot of mistakes along the way, which I guess have resulted me kind of in the here and now making the work that I'm making. In terms of where I kind of get my subject matter or my ideas for painting, I mean, Phong and the Rail chose some of these lion paintings, for instance, for the shows. And, interestingly enough, like when Trump...
let's put those up. Let's put EJ's, there are pictures at the end of the slideshow. EJ has two. And let's put those up. Those are,
number 40.
Yeah, number 40.
So when Trump was elected in 2016, I was so broken and wanting to find some sort of way to talk about how confused and kind of disoriented I was after this moment. And I found myself thinking a lot about the Edward Hicks Peaceable Kingdom paintings. And, these paintings, number one, they all include text, which is really interesting. The whole thing about when the lion, it's from the Bible, the passage from the Old Testament. I'm not going to quote it directly, but it's something about when the lions and lambs lie down together. There's a kind of, putting down of all the swords and people being on the same page. And so I thought a lot about this, and I made a whole series of drawings, and that was kind of for a show in 2017. And then when sort of the pandemic happened, I kind of dug into these lion images, I think mostly from my kind of love of the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz. And, I kind of, as a grown-up queer person, there's something kind of queer about the cowardly lion and his, the kind of masculinity of the lion, and yet his willingness to talk about how scared he was in the narrative of the story. And so these kind of, I called them kind of voyagers, these lions. I sort of named them across, or these creatures for this last show at Derek Eller were these voyager creatures. And I guess the one in the right, the red image, to me, this horse is kind of whispering into the ear of the lion, and this piece is kind of called More Than Friends. And so to me, it kind of talks about the complicated nature among like the animals, like in the Edward Hicks paintings, for instance, and then just kind of also adjacent to the complicated relationships that we all have in our own networks of, you know, artists or personal relationships or what have you. I feel like I'm kind of going on, but does that sort of start to?
Yeah, and it actually leads me to another question, which I wanted to ask Tamara. And that has to do with, I've been thinking a lot about art as it's evolved in the Hispanic world. And there's no easy generalizations about that, but I've been very interested in how imagery from, let's say, pre-Columbian, however that can be construed, how that's managed to make its way back into contemporary art. And in particular, I'm thinking about the fact that we went through a whole period where there was kind of persona non grata. That is, if you're referring to kind of mythological material, if you're talking about pre-Columbian imagery, if you're using indigenous motifs, that there was a kind of prejudice against that, certainly in the art world that I was experiencing. And I'm wondering, Tamara, if you encountered that, because the way you use that, the way you make it new, is really quite remarkable. Just wondering what your experience was like, because it does kind of brand you in a way. It could theoretically make you an outsider as well. You have to unmute. There you go.
Forgot that important piece. I was just saying a couple key moments in your question where you dropped out and I didn't
I'm sorry.
get it. But I think I can still speak to the spirit of the question. And, you know, the insider, outsider, sort of either or, that's now these lines are being, you know, happily erased more and more. And, you know, masteries appreciated in all camps. I definitely felt that as an artist, only because I lacked a lot of the education chops that a lot of my friends had gone through. And I'm talking about being in Williamsburg around 1994 when I committed to, you know, that this was the path I was going to follow in front of everything else. So I had worked my way through an associate's degree that gives you painting 1, painting 2, drawing 1, drawing 2, color theory, anatomy, and had some great teachers, great experiences. But as far as formal education, that was it. And, you know, I had the benefit of having a nice, robust artist community around me. You know, Bill Jensen, Margaret Luchik, Stanley Marina, and of course, Chris Martin. And I was always told, and Kathy Bradford too, that doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. You know, just keep working. And, you know, I don't know what would have happened if I didn't have that. You know, it was a real support at a tender moment as a young artist. As far as the imagery, early on, I worked in installations and, you know, putting paintings in installations, and I received comments back, looks like poor people, if you can imagine.
Yeah, oh my God.
How the climate has changed, you know, and I mean, as an artist, you keep working, you know, as far as, you know, this sort of my mythological, you know, my interest in history or symbolism or how this expresses itself in my work. I don't even think about it. It's my work. Like that's what's going to come forward if I'm honest, if I'm not trying to maybe chase an ideal of what I think the art world may want from me in this moment. You know, so it's just a natural evolution. And growing up in California, you know, I'm half Mexican and yet very, very, you know, cut off from that experience, raised by my Italian grandparents, very whitewashed, very much wanting to be, you know, American. And later through travels, I was able to visit Mexico, discover some of this history, and lo and behold, it looks like what I'm doing. I have no explanation. I don't know.
Right.
You know, it's just like there's really none. But the color and all that, you know, my early idols were Agnes Martin, a lot of the minimalist painters, and yet my work is, you know, nothing like that.
That's really very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm struck by that story. I think it is the story of modern art, where basically artists are told over and over again all the things they're not supposed to do. And then they go out and do them. And that is exactly what makes their work important. And, you know, I'm thinking about that in terms of, brings me to Sam's work. I've been thinking about Sam's typewriters a lot. Primarily because I spend a lot of time at a keyboard, and sometimes the keyboard starts to look a lot like these typewriters. And the courage that it takes to do work like this, where you know you're going to break some rules, you're going to do it absolutely your own way, and you're going to have to challenge people to deal with that. And Sam, I wanted to ask you about the importance for this work and the work that you've done throughout your career of self-taught artists like John Searle, who you met back in 1989. John Searle is one of the people who fascinates me as well. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about that relationship and whether it was generative for you in terms of your own work.
Well, yeah, meeting John was a great revelation, along with meeting a lot of what we now call the outsider, or we actually used to call the outsider artists.
Yes, back in the day.
1989. Because I did this, as you know, this road trip with my wife, Eleanor Gaver, and we met most of the people in these shows that were alive. William Hawkins was in the hospital, so we didn't go visit him at the time. But John once said to me that he said, I practice being naive because I know that's what people like. And he, you know, he had a house full of art books, and like many of the, like Thornton Dial had a house full of art books. Yes. Thornton Dial knew who Julian was at the time that I met him, right? He was aware of him. I'm sure, I don't know if Julian was aware of Thornton's work, but it was a great time for me because I went through a higher education. I went to Cooper, I went to Yale. I was not interested really in the lineage or the decision-making of, say, European art, but I certainly was indebted to it and I knew it. So meeting people like John and Thornton, particularly Lonnie Holly, at that time kind of made me aware that, yeah, these were real serious artists. And I say that because they were people that also had their own ways of making decisions. And it justified that the way I would make decisions in my work was valid. You know, I found a camaraderie there. So it was really important at that time period for me. And then I shared that. A few years later, I started teaching at Yale, and I immediately started telling my students about them because I thought it was a great, you know, an opening for them also to be aware that there are a lot of histories that you can tap into, not necessarily just the one straight line of European painting.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about this. I'm looking at Frank's little window up there, and I'm thinking about how important Frank's, the people he's shown and the gallery was to me personally. It actually got me started writing about art, which is kind of amazing when I think back on it. And the kinds of artists I saw, and Hawkins was for me probably the most important. I think it's absolutely right that his paintings figure prominently in these shows. And I just wanted to, mention to Frank, one of the most remarkable things I saw was a film that Frank and Roger Rico made of William Hawkins' painting. And it's an astonishing revelation. And it does kind of what you're talking about, which is it makes it absolutely clear that what we are engaged with is a certain set of decision making. And that what artists do is they make these decisions, and those decisions are their own. And it was remarkable to watch Hawkins do that at a level that is incontestable.
I'm going to I just want to say one other thing, which
Yeah.
I could respond to, which is I was thinking of Robert Colescott recently.
Sure.
Because I remember, in the late 70s, the 80s, going to see his shows at Phyllis Kind. And Phyllis Kind was considered at that time an outsider art gallery.
Right, exactly.
And so it was like, why was Robert showing there? Clearly because he was Black.
Right.
But I just think that, that moment, and he is a really great example of how the world has fortunately changed and opened up.
Yeah, and absolutely. And again, that opens the door on that much larger historical discussion about where these exhibitions fit into that long history. I did want to ask Frank about his participation, or the gallery's participation in offering a venue, and obviously some key works to the show. Frank, do you want to talk about the importance for you of the gallery's piece of this? You have to unmute.
Oh, am I on
There. Now
Oh.
you're good.
Oh, okay. I'm on someone else's computer, so just figuring out everything is, it's difficult for me anyway, but it's particularly difficult at the moment. But anyway, Lyle, as you know, we've known each other really forever, and we've published.
Not exactly.
Pretty much. We've published a lot together and have had art adventures, and it's been great. It's been absolutely great. There's almost no one I would rather talk to than Lyle. And as I've said many times, Lyle is the kind of person that whether we're having lunch or whether we're having dinner or whether we're just having a conversation in the gallery, I often say when we are in conversation with one another and I hear things coming out of my mouth and I say to myself, did I actually say that? Where did that come from? So what does that mean? It means that Lyle is the kind of person that in conversation or otherwise always makes you feel smarter than you actually are. So I've had some of my all-time favorite conversations with Lyle. So back to the question. So we've been doing this for an awfully long time. We opened the gallery in 1979, and there weren't many people around at that time. The name Phyllis Kind has been mentioned, and Phyllis Kind was certainly around. And Phyllis Kind was, in the beginning, back then, I consider her that she was a mentor, certainly a mentor that became a colleague. I was very fond of Phyllis, and Phyllis was certainly a pioneer, and Phyllis was doing basically what we came to do before we were doing it. So if you take an artist like Martin Ramirez, there are a number of them in the show, in the 5 shows. And the first time I came into contact with Martin Ramirez, who we now have represented the estate of Martin Ramirez for 15 years now. But it was probably back in 1975. No, it was later than that. It was probably 1978 or so, and I was in Phyllis Kine's gallery. I had never heard of Martin Ramirez. And here was this tall vertical of a train coming out of a tunnel, a very sort of phallic kind of a thing, but graphic and surprising, and something that was really unlike anything I had ever seen. And basically that's what I look for. I always look for something that takes me on a voyage. It's very much of a Star Trek kind of a thing, putting gender aside, as Captain Kirk said, to go where no man has ever gone before. So I'm looking for art that takes me somewhere where I've never gone before. And so here I am looking at this work by someone that I did not know at all in Phyllis Kine's gallery. And I really wasn't particularly familiar with Phyllis Kine at that time. And I was just being absolutely, totally transported by the work. So much so that I actually wrote out a check for that William Hawkins, maybe an hour later or so in the gallery. And I remember Phyllis was seated behind her desk and I was on the other side and I was writing out the check and my hand was literally shaking. I could barely write out the check. Part of it was that I was broke and I was spending an enormous amount of money. So that caused for a certain degree of handshaking in itself. And the other part of it was that I was just so damn excited by the work. It really took me, I would say it was a major event that took me on a voyage that is still continuing. Soon after that came William Hawkins. And I guess, as they say, a certain amount of that is history. But in any event, whether it's someone like Martin Ramirez, who is a true outsider, or whether it's William Hawkins, who is a true self-taught person, the common denominator between the two of them is that neither one of them, and this has been brought up before in the Zoom, that neither one of the two artists, outsider or self-taught, knew the rules. They were non-academic people. And so because they did not know the rules, they were not afraid to break the rules that they never knew. And so consequently, there was no fear. And when you're looking at art that is produced by artists that are truly fearless, that are not taking anything from any other place, these are people who are not looking at art books. They are people who have been born with a gift. And I believe that great art the nucleus for great art comes out of a gift. Teachers help people who are born with a gift develop that gift, but the nucleus, the seed of it, I don't know where it comes from. It's the seed of creativity. Wherever it is, I know that Martin Ramirez had a great gift. I know that William Hawkins had a great gift. And that's what really took me on a journey that now has lasted 41 years.
Great. Yeah, and it's been a long, I've been along for part of it, that's for sure.
You've been around for a lot of it.
Yeah.
And an important part of all of it, I have to say.
Well, one of the things I noticed as we're going through the slides, and this is a kind of final question, maybe if we have time to do this. And this is directed at Brian. There's a slide from the Rico Maresca show, and I don't know which one it is, but it's like maybe 2 or 3 slides back. Here's some pictures of you can see in the.
Hey Lyle, do you mind leaning in very close to your laptop? Mhm.
Yep. In the pictures that are up right now, the picture that's up right now, they're the sort of kids imitation pictures that Brian did. But the ones at Rico Maresca, if you can go back where you were before, I had the strangest experience in seeing these, because when I walked into the show, I saw these 2 pictures that Brian had done, and I said, "Oh, those are by Dwight McIntosh, who's a self-taught artist." Let's see if we can find those. If we go back, it's not this set, not that one. Let's go back one more.
Is it in the Rico Maresca show?
Yes, it's in Rico Maresca. Yeah, these 2. If you look at the 2 on the right, there's one with people with parasols, and then there's a piece below. These 2 that Brian did, I was absolutely convinced that they were done by Dwight McIntosh, who's somebody I've written about, as a matter of fact. And I just passed them by and I said, "Oh, those are really good Dwight McIntoshes." So I'm really curious, Brian, about your, let's say, your practice in a case like this. Thinking about, sort of children's art, so-called, and just how you work that way. Because these are quite unusual pictures. I love them.
Thank you. Children's art is such a refreshing subject. It's kind of like a bomb of creativity for many of the reasons you were earlier mentioning, which have to do with not even breaking the rules because you're not aware of them. The type of elastic, carefree neuroplasticity that comes with youth. So children's art has been a big influence of mine forever. My mothers were both elementary school teachers, and I would go to the school at the end of every year and rescue whatever children's art was left in the art room. So I'd been collecting children's art for a long time. I tried copying it myself. I went to Cooper Union, got thrown out, and in that time where I was at Cooper Union, I was trying to make copies of my own childhood drawings, but found it a little bit too difficult. So I abandoned that for a little bit, but always my art has been influenced by art making processes, which are influenced by games, by humor, by fun, whatever can crack the egg open for just free associative play. I think it's very hard as an artist because we're all in our studios, whether we're alone inside our own head or sharing spaces with other artists. We are in competition with each other. We are in competition in our head. We're in competition with history. Where there's so much ambition. We want to burn bright and our best in the context of our exhibitions. And in a certain way, this is a jail. So I look towards children's art as a way, to look to making art in a way that's way more playful and less about whether it's good or bad. So some of the paintings in the other exhibition are paintings where I really attempted to copy children's art to the best of my ability. And I consider those failures. I call them failures, which makes it really confusing for galleries and gallerists and collectors to want to collect them. Because if the artist is telling you that what they did is a failure, it kind of foils the idea of something being worth something. But I call them failures because children's art is exploding with authenticity. It's, you know, kind of like what the Cobra artists were after, looking for this, you know, freshly born idea. So I call those works failures or forgeries or failed forgeries. And the works that you have here are an attempt for me to use a couple devices that maybe revealed that an adult artist was involved.
Right.
So these are direct copies or tracings of this. One thing that I do is I'm a steward of a collection, Rhoda Kellogg Children's Art Collection.
Right.
And these are two examples from that collection. And they were scanned, and then I blew them up and gridded them out and reversed them and made, these are on plexi. So what they are tracings of drawings. Put on plexiglass, and I use glitter glue and spray paint. And so my point is that they've changed. They're no longer like humble beginnings. They're not made on construction paper or cheap canvas board or using tempera. So they do actually have some signals of the adult artist processing them.
Right. No, it's really fascinating to me. I'd love to do a show at some point. I'd love to curate a show called Not Quite As Good As, and then you kind of put in whatever you want. But it's a great wall we're looking at with Fong's work and Tamara's work and these two pieces we were talking about, and then Fong's work is drawing a Tel Adnan over in the corner. I think this is a good time to take questions from the audience. I really appreciate, I mean, it's such a great group of artists. You're all doing such unusual stuff that it's really, I mean, it really does exemplify kind of some of the ideas that Phong is talking about. And I wish we had 10 times as much more time just to talk about what you're up to. But I want to thank you. It's been a real pleasure for me to see the work and to be able to talk to you about it. So if we have, I know that there's questions from the audience. We should probably, Eleanor, if you want to honcho these.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lyle. And thank you for this absolutely amazing conversation. Our first question will be from our friend GE. GE, you should be able to unmute for your question. You able to
Yes,
unmute?
there we go. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. And thank you so much. We've been waiting for this one for a long time. This is a question, especially, I think, probably for both Phong and Cal, the curators. In curating this constellation of curations, was it at least part of your goal, kind of effort to renew our native expression spirit, the kind of unique voice that Walt Whitman hoped would emerge and render kind of a new beacon to our world in a world so need of one right now?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that it wasn't that long after the Civil War ended and then the assassination of Lincoln, which arose this terrible corruption, chaos in America. And that's when the context of Democratic Vista was written in response to Thomas Carlyle's criticism of American democracy. And I think that was very important in the context. If you remember reading it, I remember reading it in college, and of course, along with his poetry, the idea of the site from which he was nurturing all the wounded soldier, North and South, to life. And you know he was famous for written thousands of letters to the family, sort of updating the process of healing many of whom didn't make it. So that was a very intimate rapport and engagement that he had with each patient. And one of the many sites was the gymnasium, of course. And gymnasium, as he say, was not made for for a superior athlete, trained athlete. The gymnasium was made for everyone who comes. It's very important. And the task of the artists, of poets and writers was to amplify that cultural pluralism. Everybody's welcome to the gymnasium, to the site. And that's the only way that it can really prevent anything that's made to the art and humanity is not made for the cultural elites. And that's why in response to Carlyle, he was very aggressively affirming the cosmic optimism, the cosmic energy that American has, that nobody has. So that's the part that I think we tend to forget sometime. Okay, when God say, let the light be, the light say, my Lord, I shall have to wait. And God say, what do you have to wait for? And then light say, I wait for darkness so we can manifest together. And God say, but the darkness already there. And light say, in that case, I'm ready there. So that's the agility that people like us, artists, creative individual, must act upon. And I think that's exactly what everybody's saying here. Tamara say the same thing, EJ, Frank from perspective of gallerist say the same thing, Vera, Sam for sure, and of course, Brian. There's a chronic urgency that we have to trust and follow. We have to surrender. So I'm not curating for the, Cal and I are not doing this for the Modern Museum of Art. They will never ask us. And the institution will attend into endless curatorial meeting. It will never get done. We have to be agile, responsive, with great urgency, but I forgot what your question was.
I think you answered it. And we're all, because of that, I think we're all singing in unison. So it's given us that platform to be there for that. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
I can't add anything that Phong hasn't already articulated better than I could, but GE, thank you for your poem.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, too, for making it all possible.
Thank you so much, GE. Such an amazing question. Always just the best energy here. Just had to shout you out. Our next question will be from Chloe. Chloe, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the artists participating today who are in the show could speak to what the title Singing in Unison means to you in your work.
Well, I can speak to that if you like.
I would love that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chloe. I mean, first of all, I think that Phong's idea and invitation to participate here was just incredibly healing in its attempt, and I'm deeply honored to be included. And I feel that the way with this absolutely egalitarian approach, Phong and his team achieved what I feel we all needed after, the Trump years have been addressed by other people, but I identify with what has been said. And then, of course, the pandemic, which isolated us. And then subsequently, when Phong invited me to participate, I offered a couple of images and he chose what he chose. But I feel like he couldn't have chosen better, because the works I made inside the empty Pepsi factory in the early 2000s, when that building was still standing at the East River in Long Island City, was inspired by kind of the beauty of garbage, really. It was a decaying factory that was left behind, of no interest to anybody, and it was just falling apart, and it had a completely self-created beauty, with absolutely no intention. And in the way I work with this large scale camera, everything that appears inside my camera projected onto the wall and eventually projected onto photographic paper is in a way of equal importance and of equal right. It's a completely egalitarian system. I don't work with a photographic lens, and so I never optically prioritize one element over the other, which, returning to your question, feeds so beautifully to the intent of the exhibition of equal right and singing in unison, standing next to so many other fantastically gifted artists who make completely different things, which I love and inspire me. And I felt the way this was set up really avoids any idea of competition and achievement, which someone else in this conversation touched on, is again such a healing experience in an art world that has largely created that dominant thought that we're not working with one another and in unison, but sort of against one another in competition. And I can only say I felt very much reminded to my very early experiences as an artist, sort of hanging out with other artists and being excited about other people's work when I came to the openings of the shows. And that's an amazing experience and achievement that the Rail and all of you provided for me. So thank you.
I'd like to say, if I could, am I on? I guess can everyone hear me? Okay. The show, with regard to the curation of the show, I think I'm the only gallerist that's on this panel, and the show could virtually be called "Singing with Spontaneity." I've been involved with so many museums and been a part of curating so many shows that have taken so many years upon years upon years to get a museum show together. And I'm still, completely, totally in awe, really, of how this show came together. I have to say, I was totally frightened by the entire thing when a week before the show, I would call Phong or I would call Cal and want to talk about the show. And I came to the realization that the show basically had not been chosen yet a week before. And then all of a sudden, all of this work came into the gallery. I've never done anything like this in my life before. Everything was really carefully planned. And I'm sure that this was all carefully planned by Phong and Cal, but it was carefully planned in the most wonderful, spontaneous way, where it came together, not in a way like a museum show. It was just the spontaneous joining of voices. It was more like jazz. It was more like a whole bunch of artists, musicians getting together and jamming, and Cal and Phong were the conductors.
Great analogy.
Yeah, I would just jump in and say, I love, Vera, what you said in the beginning there about the idea of community. And Phong, I think the show just really feels like what you and the whole Rail have been working on for decades now, which is just this openness and inclusion. And I think it really embraces the second line of Song of Myself, every atom belonging to me is good belongs to you. So I just applaud you and Cal and everyone, Eleanor, and everyone at the Rail for making this space. And the one good thing about the pandemic is that it's really enlarged that space dramatically.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because as we were going through the slides and you see the you know, just the ambition and the breadth of the work, and as you described, you know, how quickly it was done and how organically, I mean, I've known Phong for many years, so when he was in my studio, I have total trust. He couldn't walk out with anything. But it just reminds me of the larger point of art for me is to somehow replenish the human spirit. And so that second half that artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. Maybe these are similar to the, you know, the light and the dark, that there's just this hopefully naturally energetic rising of creation just to, you know, so sort of the triumph of the human spirit in spite of everything that's going on. And it takes like kind of, for me, this type of show and the way it evolves to just really bring that to my heart again.
I'd like to try to throw some more Walt Whitman into the conversation, as always, which is, you know, Walt Whitman had this idea that he understood that poets or artists that came before him, he was holding hands with them, as well as his contemporaries. And he also had the idea that he was then going to be holding hands with artists after he was gone. And I think that the show and the way it's curated with artists that have passed, kind of being like the patron saint, so to speak, of the curation for each of the iterations of the show, demonstrates that. And it also makes me think then of Genesis Peerage, who had that great sculpture of their hand, and you could shake it. It was out in Red Hook. It closed recently, but it had Brian Gysin's quote underneath it, that wisdom can only be passed on by the touching of hands. And I just feel like this whole show is just a lot of hand-holding, beautiful hand-holding.
Thank you so much for all of those answers.
Yeah, thank you. Such a beautiful question, amazing responses. For the last question, I would love to ask to the artists, just if participating in this deeply collaborative show has changed the way that you see your work, or if, you know, it may inform future practices, curatorial visions. Just, you know, how are you going to continue to carry this experience in your work in the future?
Well, I'll just say this isn't the first time Phong's done something like this. And I guess I just feel that one of the great benefits of being an artist is that we never get to the bottom of learning about new people's practices. We're always inspired by someone that we don't know. And it's just such a treasure to be inspired by having so many you know, diverse practices hanging together. And it kind of embodies the whole Rails spirit as well. So maybe that's one part of the answer. I mean, Phong's showed us all how it's done.
Well, if anybody, no one has anything, I just add last thing is that it's important to be reminded that the visual art as a site, a platform from which we really bring all the practice as a public programming. In other words, there are poetry reading, musical performances, Rigrit, Dorothea, and Tomasu will be cooking, had been cooked for us and opening. Now we are raising to do more public programming. So it's the multiple viewing experience for those who haven't seen it, especially the site, the forthcoming one at Industry City. It's 16,000 square feet. That will be opening in September 6th. Am I right, Cal?
16th.
16. And then before that, maybe another venue open in the first week of September. September, the date, Cal?
Miguel Abreu opens September 8th.
Terrific. So it'll be ongoing, and it's so popular as a concept. So in the future, whether you, Lyle, or EJ, or Sam, or whoever else, Brian, would like to curate a show of this, you know, similar theme, Carl and I be happy to pass on the baton. So it's not owned by Phong or Carl at all. It's going to be shared from our own idea of what it looked like, because chamber music, there's symphonic music, and all kind of music. So I was very excited about this idea to take it across, even across all the city. It doesn't have to be just in New York City either. And I meant to say also last thing is that there's artists who struggle with mental illness is part of the equation. And so is artists who are in prison, who art is the most important refuge that save their sanity. And they're part of what we are doing also. So yeah, back to you, Eleanor.
Thank you. Anybody wants to?
Yeah, I want to
So
add one thing, Eleanor, at the end. I just listening to people talk about how important this is. So I've been writing about art for 35 years, like that. And there are three things that happened to me that were really important.
Can you come a little closer to your speaker line?
Yeah, sorry. The first thing that happened was my encounters with so-called outsider art. That was the first. Second thing was starting to teach. So I was around people who really didn't care about what I thought, and I had to think about what they were thinking. And the third thing was getting involved with the rail. And those three experiences have absolutely changed certainly my viewing world, probably 180 degrees. And it's one of the reasons why I value these shows so much, because even in this short period of experiences, they've really, really changed a lot of my thinking about what I'm looking at. And that, I mean, for that, everybody has to be grateful. So
I have to say that once again, the great thing about Lyle, and the thing that I admire most really is that Lyle actually listens. Everybody wants to hear themselves speak, but Lyle actually listens and processes. And I love that.
Thanks, Frank. Now the Hug Fest is over.
Well, I just like to add a big shout out to all of you that have been working on this whole series for this whole time. You know, everybody at the Rail, from your heart. You're leaving an amazing gift to the future. You know, I mean, when I think of somebody finding these and listening to all these different talks and all these different perspectives, it really warms my heart, you know, along with, yeah, okay, there was Twitter and there was this going on. There was also this, and that's sort of what I mean about the triumph of the human spirit, that like, you keep showing up to do this, you know, there's days where it's wildly popular, there's days where it's medium popular, it doesn't matter, this archive is going to be amazing. So I really want to thank you all at the Brooklyn Rail for this and for the future.
Thank you so much, Tamara. That means a lot to us. So yeah, thank you. Thank you again to all of you for this amazing conversation. And as many of you know, we have a tradition here at the Rail of ending our community events with a poetry reading. So I'm extremely excited to introduce Carla Harryman, our Poet Laureate of the day. Carla Harryman is the author of 25 books of poetry, prose, and performance writing. Her most recent publication is Cloud Cantata. She lives in the Detroit metro area and serves on the faculty of Eastern Michigan University. Thank you so much for joining us, Carla. Please take it away.
Hi, it's a pleasure. There was so much going on that I fell into chaos in figuring out what to read because I wanted it to respond to what people were saying. And what I decided to do is read a kind of two works from a series that's part of a 3-book trilogy of poetry dialogues. And these come from Scales, which is the raw and unpublished aspect of the work at the moment. Echo Sun, in memory a tell. There was to be an epiphany, but it slipped out of my sun. It slipped through mine as well. Do you think it was the same sun? Each sun is a distinct sun. There is no same sun, even when they are both red. There will be an ellipsis when they are red, and when they are missing, it is not possible to possess the sun. A sun, singularity fades within the absolute. The sun is self-evident. I suppose you are referring to the word sun. An elliptical night slipped out when the shadow it cast went unobserved. It doubled the sky. A quadrangle distinguishes it, and a shadow followed a sun, and tangled in matter a word next. Its shadow striking an echo multiplied, and the vision slipped out of my sun as well, what I can't possess, as she makes her way, the epiphany or the sun, the heat from incisive colloquy of one and another shields her along, sending among. And then the other poem is Scale 12, Why I Am Not a Poet. You remember that track? The one about painting? Sure, I remember. It does that substitution thing when one thing is substituted for another. But they are not equivalent, are they? No, it just makes negative attribution proliferate. Kitschy hearts flying out of storm drains and into cracks. Meanings slip through as they do now in a time of war. When there wasn't one, a time of war? You think there wasn't? No, you interrupted that I was going to say we weren't alive ad infinitum. So we don't know what to grease, oil, or paint, how to brushstroke in the battleground of thoughts. When poets haven't studied war sufficiently, ain't gonna study war no more. Remember, it felt good to sing, to have some fervor in the work of protest, that hot and dull straggling of the poetic so-called. Then the body got left out of the picture at the end of conscription, so that the picture slams into the returning soldier's front door. It's still morning, and who's the straggler now? In Mali, their light switch flipped onto nothing can be known, though it can be described, names named, denials met. There is something I wanted to say about Ukraine because the taste of war strikes in the neighborhood, and one can say the window imagined the subject returning to face the hearth, singing accusations, while the poet has to be cosmopolitan and know everybody, while envisioning peace without leaving you out of the poem. Your characterization is likely to piss someone off. You know, I've been thinking about the inside and the outside, the soldier's window slammed into the front door picture, yes, and the painting of the shards they pull out of their arm, the drops of cartoon red, the cherry market. I've been thinking about those pissed off poets throwing poems to the wolves. That wasn't my point. I was thinking about the inside and the outside, not plucking at sentiment. Is the scale we use in conversation appropriate to the sounds we wish to make? Thank you for listening. This was an amazing experience to sit through this incredible conversation.
Thank you so much, Carla. What an amazing reading to conclude today. We would also just like to again thank Brian, Frank, EJ, Sam, Vera, Tamara, Phong, and Lyle. We'd also like to thank Cal, the co-curator of Singing in Unison, and also the teams from Art Cake, Scully Tomasco Foundation, Below Grand, Rico Maresca, and Toda for helping make today's event possible. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful political and social meditations in our monthly publications and our public events, like our daily NSE. So please check the chat for a link to donate to support our operations and writers and editors here at the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 97th Radical Poetry reading by Connie Mae Concepcion Oliver, featuring reading by Viento Izquierdo Ugaz, Daniel Shapiro, and Katarina Canyon. You can now all turn on your mics to say hello and goodbye, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye,
Eleanor.
guys.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
So much.
Thank you,
Carla.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thanks, Tam.
Sam, thank you, Brian.
Guys, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Carla.
Thank
Thank
all
you, Carla, for the
listening in
reading.
future.
Thank you, Lyles.
Thanks, Lyle.
Thanks, Phong.
Thank you, Phong.
Thank you, you guys.
Everyone come and visit.
Thank you.
Phong and Lyle.
Thank you,
Lyle.
Brian.
Thank you, Cal.
Thank you, Carla, for the reading.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
So much energy right now. But I think let's
Wow.
go to lunch.
I've got mine here.
Enjoy lunch, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Jean. Bye, Frank.
Yeah.
Bye,
Bye,
Carla.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Be well, safe.